Hey guys, I'm learning TFT. In this video, I'm going to go through a bunch of learnings that I did after VOD reviewing Dishsoap's World's final day run where he won the World Championship. I went through all 5 of his games, broke down a bunch of learnings, questions, screenshots, my kind of Cliff Notes versions of the big takeaways I had from his finals last day. My focus here is to focus on less set and patch specific stuff, but go back to the fundamentals to abstract the learnings so that many of these ideas can be applied to set 14. So before I dive into that, I'm going to go into the meta mindset of today, which is long-term focus, especially as we are approaching set 14. PPE comes out on Tuesday. And so that's kind of my approach for this video. If you want to jump straight into the learnings, you can check out the timestamps in the description below. So meta mindset, long-term focus. We're going to start with patience. Anand, the chess master, I believe he won at least one world championship. I'm not completely positive. Said, it always makes sense to keep working at goals without obsessing over how far you are from it or how hopelessly you're missing the mark each time. If you persevere, it will eventually be yours. So going back to, hey, we're approaching set 14, being patient and taking your time, focusing on the process again. At the very beginning, when you have a seed and you're trying to water the seed, the gardener doesn't focus on getting the fruit right away. If you focus on planting the seed, watering it, nurturing it, the fruit will eventually come. Maria Rilke, I believe, said, to be an artist means not to reckon and count, to ripen like the tree, which does not force its sap and stands confident in the storms of spring, without fear lest no summer might come after it. It does come. So again, being patient, knowing that if you figure out the process, if you focus on learning and getting better each day, then results will follow. The Dhammapada, don't underestimate good, saying it can't happen to me. Water falling drop by drop will fill even a large pot. Likewise, the wise man, accumulating good little by little, becomes goodness itself. And a key idea next is what won't change, and this ties with the idea of fundamentals. Jeff Bezos, Amazon's lead founder, said, I very frequently get the question, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And that is a very interesting question. It's a very common one. I almost never get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? So similarly, we often ask, what's going to change in the next set? What's going to change in the next patch? And Bezos would actually say, the second question is actually the more important of the two. That is, what's not going to change? Because you can build a business strategy around the things that are stable in time. The same can be true for TFT. You can build a long-term strategy in your learning process around what won't change in TFT. And that will be my focus in this video when I'm going through the learnings, is how to abstract the learnings that I got from Dishsoap to apply to future patches and sets. Bezos continues by saying, we know the energy we put into it today will still be paying off dividends for our customers 10 years from now. When you have something that you know is true, even over the long term, you can afford to put a lot of energy into it. So this is just as true for TFT. Like, let's say you have a scaling augment in the early game, like no scout, no pivot. You have investment strategy. You have pumping up. When you can scale your knowledge in the fundamentals over time, that investment that you're putting in, you can put a lot more energy into that than if you're just focusing on what's the hot comp in the meta at any time. And so, especially at the end of a set, as it's winding down, I find that it's particularly important to kind of refocus on the fundamentals. Sam Altman, the entrepreneur and founder of OpenAI, said, one of the most notable aspects of compound growth is that the farthest out years are the most important. In a world where almost no one takes a truly long-term view, the market richly rewards those who do. So again, when you focus on the fundamentals, you have compounding over time, You think about this with like an infectious anomaly in set 13. You think about this with any scaling augment. That compounding really pays off in the long run, and the same goes for focusing on fundamentals. So that's what we're going to do today when we go into these games. All right, so game one was Jason counter, and I'll include a link in the description below to this whole page. And I included links to the Twitch sections, so if you want to jump to each of these games, check the link in the description below. So first game was Jason counter, which means you get item anvil. And so the part of the question here is, how do you prioritize what units to hold in stage 1? And what do you sell to make Morg 2 here? So we have Morg 2 as a possible purchase. We have an open tier, and in my previous learnings from regionals, we talked about how Dishsoap does not like to hold Morg if he does not have a tier, since blue buff is so critical for her to be successful as a unit. And so one question here is, do you sell? You could sell any of your bench units to buy the Morg. And so the question is, especially with an artifact, Dishsoap has talked about on both Vi encounter and Jason counter, or more generally, when you think about future sets and patches, whenever you have more items, this can be true for a 5 item component opener as well. You want to lean towards reroll because you can get a fully itemized 2-star carry and be extremely strong in early stage 3 and have a lot of items to fully itemize, a full tank, full carry much earlier than you normally would have the opportunity for. And so given that Morgana is your primary unit you want to play around in the early game, what we want for her is frontline. And so you would lean towards selling one of these instead of the Scar. You want to keep the family line open since you want to lean towards reroll, and frontline is more important than backline, so he sells the Ezreal over the Scar. So this idea here is, what do you sell, is kind of thinking about what is your primary carry, and then you kind of work backwards from there, and what are the alternate lines that you might want to consider. So what possible lines are open to you from this spot? What direction do your items point you in, and how does that impact the units that you hold? So he has Aurelia pair here with the Morg 2. He doesn't really have great slammable items for the Morg 2. Usually, if you want to go Morg reroll, you want to go like blue buff, Gunblade, +1, like some type of damage item. And so he doesn't have a great setup for that. And he does have 3 possible family units, though even in the family line, there's not really great slams. But the artifact could unlock some of that, like if you get a Death's Defiance or Prowler's Claw or something for your Violet. So we do want to hold likely the Darius. So part of the question is, what do you hold here? And we want to consider what are the possible lines that are open. And in this case, given that we have open tier, bow, belt, cloak, this likely leans towards AP. Morg reroll being the most likely option. And one thing Dishsoap has mentioned before is thinking about the possible lines open to you from a probabilistic standpoint. So he might say like, okay, this is like a 60% Morg reroll spot, like a 20% fast 8 spot, and a 20% family spot. And the thing is, what units you hold will affect the distribution of possible outcomes here. And given that we have tier bow, we probably want to lean towards one of the top 2 because family doesn't really have, much here. So that's why what lines have the highest EV would be Morg reroll, AP flex greater than family. So he would actually sell these 2 family units to buy the 2 sorcerers and probably sell the step for the Darius. So you want to buy the units that align with the highest EV lines. So he would sell these 3 and then buy the shop. So the basic idea here is that Again, you want to focus on what's your strongest unit, then what are your alternate outs as far as the possible lines they lead you down given the item components, and then maximizing the odds of the direction that you would go in, so more reroll or AP flex with the units that you're holding. And the good thing with Darius, with the sorcerers, is it gives you probably your strongest frontline until you hit Aurelia 2, and Vladimir is 2 degrees connecting the sorcerers to the watchers, so it allows you to flex both lines. Next, how do your possible lines influence your augment selection? So here, we talked about how your possible lines are likely more reroll or tempo AP flex leaning towards sorcerers, but could eventually go into dominators with Silco or rebels with Zoe. So next, given that we have an idea of the likely direction we're heading down, which augments are good for those lines? Called Shot, we're not that strong. Placebo is good for tempoing or just for reroll, although it's like overall just like kind of a mid augment, but Dishsoap has talked about with more item openers, you want to have more gold to hit your reroll lines. But a key idea here is that with more reroll, his items are kind of scuffed and it's hard to slam because ideally he wants blue buff, gunblade, +1. And so component buffet here actually enables more reroll much better, since you can basically guarantee that you're able to eventually hit your 3 item carry probably by 3-1. So in this case, because he values playing reroll and wants to have a decent opener and start, since being able to slam items and win early fights does give you gold generation, that's why he picks component buffet here. So this is where knowing your possible lines influences your augment selection. So in this case, knowing that you want to lean towards Morgana reroll allows you to select component buffet. All right, what items do you slam? How does your board win a fight, and what's your strongest board? So here he picks Blighting Jewel from the artifacts, which is good for Morgana, so he's committed down this line. And from a Abyss standpoint, I would pick, ideally you would have wanted blue buff. With no blue buff here, we have Gunblade and Open Tier, but then no other slammable items. And so you think about, how do you win a fight here in the early game? With Blighting Jewel, it's actually quite strong. You really need frontline. That's how you win early fights. And so my inclination would have been like, oh, I should just go for Biss. Get 3 item carry as fast as possible. But the thing is, even if you get blue buff, Gunblade, Blighting Jewel, Morgana with a weak frontline, especially since you have no slammable frontline, you're still not going to win fights. Because Morgana, the way her spell kind of works is you need time. So taking a vest here is actually better because you want traditional tank items to give Morgana time. So he picks a vest, slams a stone plate on the Scar, and then slams Morello. So he gives up the early Gunblade, he wants to greed blue buff, and he knows that over enough time he will eventually be able to get his Biss items because he has the component buffet. Next, what's more valuable, board strength or interest gold? Do you want to make 10 gold here, or do you want to play strongest board? So you want to consider, are you streaking? If he had won the first fight, he would be more willing to try to play strongest board and miss econ interval. On a 1 loss, you're more likely to consider making 10 gold. The other question is, you could just play the 2 Aurelias, sell 3, 4, 5, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6, and just be able to go towards your Sentinel direction, or just be able to play strongest board. And strongest board here, by the way, would actually be step 2. With reroll, it's often important to make early interest thresholds to have enough gold to hit on or head tempo in stage 3. If he had won the first fight, then winning 2 in a row would actually give you +2 gold streak value, so likely yes. But without the 2 win streak potential, winning and losing actually gives you the same amount of gold. Either way, you get 1 gold. So at this phase in the game, gold value is more important than HP. I'm not sure what I said here. So he does sell to make 10 gold. And he puts the stone plate on the step. All right, let's see. So yes, he does make 10 gold there. Does he make 20 gold here or hold the frontline pairs? And so similar question, you would think that the same logic would apply, although the part of the question is how strong could he be if he is able to hit a 2-star frontliner soon? Because if he can get a tier off carousel, he is close to being strong. And so in this case, if we hit Aurelia 2, are we going to be able to streak? Probably soon, or at least mixed streak. And he'll likely be strong in stage 3 once we hit in our head tempo. So in that case, he actually does hold. He does not sell to make 20. It's interesting that he played 3 Morganas here. I'm not exactly sure why. I would have probably played 3 tank units with this. So if anybody has ideas on why Dishsoap did this, I would definitely be curious. And if at any point you have questions, comments about feedback around maybe I got something wrong or additional thoughts, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and include a timestamp to this point in the video. All right, next, should you hyper roll on 3-1 for 1 cost reroll? So in this case, he has 6 copies of Morgana. He needs 3 more copies. He did win the last round, so he has streak incentive to continue the streak. And so one of the questions, should you hyper roll? And the roll calculator would tell you if you're at level 4, I'm just randomly put in 8 copies and a bunch, I'm assuming 5 1 costs out of the pool for each player on average, and 30 gold, you have a 40% chance to hit Morg 2 or Morg 3, which is like reasonable odds. And rolling 40 gold has a 60% chance to hit. We're on a 1 streak, so winning gives us 2 gold. So if it was fight diff to get to hit within 20 gold, it would actually break even. What he ends up doing is he decides to roll to the low 40s, doesn't hit any morgs, so stops rolling. And he might have sent it if he hit 1 to 2 morgs by the time he got 40 gold. And this is actually a pattern that we'll see in many of the other games, where he gives himself the opportunity to high roll when he is deciding whether to roll down or not. But he tends to stay above 40 gold so that he can easily get back to 50. And it straddles that middle ground where he can give himself an opportunity to high roll. So this is an idea that I want to really give yourself opportunity to high roll when playing reroll by rolling down it to 40 gold. If you hit 1 to 2 copies and you're close, then you can send it. So he did that idea a lot. How should you position your super tank? So this is later in the game. So he has an Alawi with protective shielding anomaly, which gives you HP spread out over time in the fight. And he's playing against this Zeri with mini-me, so very high DPS carry there. And he has gunblades on his 2 main carries. So normally you would think Stoneplate and Crown Guard you want to place in the outside to get the most value. But in this case, he intentionally swaps, moves the Alawi into the middle to keep her safe longer so that she doesn't get burst down by the enemy Zeri. That would not have come across my mind, but especially with this type of board, you get so much scaling, like Morgana with the Blighting Jewel and Heimer just scales the number of missiles over time. So they get increased damage as the fight progresses, which means their healing amount plus the 6 visionary healing increases over time. And you have the protective shielding scaling the HP of the Alawi over time, which means the way you lose this fight is if the Alawi gets burst down. So he said, I probably shouldn't be getting Alawi focus because the opponent has mini-me's. So he moves Alawi to the middle to keep her safe and lets these two scale over time. And he ends up barely winning this fight, which could be a single placement diff. So that was just extremely heads-up play to keep in mind that with mini-me's, Zeri has extremely high DPS and could burst down the Alawi. All right, so that was game 1. Game 2 with the Vander encounter. What units should you be holding in stage 1? The first question is, what item components do you have and what direction do they point you in? In this case, we could be holding Vander and like leaning family, or we could be going Tristana. And he said, I don't think you're allowed to skip Tristana with IE, especially because Tristana scales over time, and if you have an early item slam, she can really start to snowball. And so he picks the Trist over the Vander. What's the strongest board and the slams? So here we have Salvage Bin, and I would have originally thought you would maybe just slam Warmog and like Steadfast. But you want to think about what is the strongest right now, and that would be Sterax and Sunfire. Because that both gives Darius survivability and damage. Because Darius is going to be your primary damage source, and you do want to get those Conqueror stacks up. So the strongest board here will be Sell Zyra, level, put the Tristana in, and then make this board here. And he was able to, I believe, full 5 streak with this board. All right, who do you put TG on to build the strongest? So he has 2 gloves here. Strongest board and preserve streak. He's on 3 streak. I would have thought put the 2 gloves here. But because he only has 1 remover, he was saying that the moment he hits a Trist 2, he wants to remove this so that he can remake this Sterax into an IE, and he can't do that if he puts the TG on the Rel. And so he's trying to kind of flex between building the strongest board possible right now while also giving himself the most flexibility once he hits this Trist 2. And so Dishsoap does a great job of being able to both preserve HP while maximizing flexibility and strength down the line. All right, and here the question is, do you want to hold multiple lines while streaking, or do you make interest? So he has a double Smeech here, and he has a Hodge BT's possible slam with an open vest for Titans, which is Smeech's Biss. And so he definitely has the possibility of being able to play around Smeech or around Tristana here. And Dishsoap's response was, I think for my brain not to hurt, I sell the Smeeches. And so I fall prey to this a lot where I'm like, oh, I should just flex multiple lines, which can cause you to make a lot of mistakes. And furthermore, it costs you interest to hold. And if you just miss both, it actually, it like increases your variance a good amount. So a key idea here is simplify your decision making. And a lot of times Dishsoap talks about like committing as early as possible. So here a question is, how would you redistribute the items here? And given that we can now make a fully itemized carry or tank, how to go about doing that. And so the first step, I believe, to approach that question, since we are trying to preserve streak, is to think about what's your strongest unit. And in this case, it's Rel 2. And you want to think about multiplicative scaling, which means that the more items you have on the same unit, the stronger they get. So you want 3 tank items, because we have 4 full items that we can build plus an open component. So we ideally want 3 full tank items and 1 carry item and 1 open component. Usually without salvage bin, that might be a risky strategy to build 3 tank items right away. Because if you get a bunch of vests, cloaks down the line, you could get really screwed. But with salvage bin, that is not as risky of a play. So he does build 3 tank items, even shroud and an IE here. And so he has all of his utility items. Next, how flexibly should you play stage 4? So he could buy the Twitch and Zeri here, and he has Rageblade IE, so he could play down towards a Twitch flex angle, and that's something I likely would have considered. But he skips the Twitch, so I think this goes back to like the Smeech question of like, should you hold multiple lines or make interest? And he could slam a bunch of Twitch items. He has a strong Sentinel frontline. And so I suspect part of this is that because he has the strong Sentinel frontline and an Alawi, vanilla Twitch really isn't that strong without specific conditions and good combat augments. A large pivot could make his game very hard to play. And he's set up really well for a simple Academy angle since he already has the Sentinel units. He has the items to play towards Academy. And so he does skip the Twitch. With Salvage Bin, you want to give yourself enough time to redistribute items during the roll down. So here, he high rolls this shop where he can pivot into Rebels. He can remake these items into a Shojin, which is really good for Jinx. Shojin IE across these two. And normally you would think that you would keep rolling to try to hit some more rebels, maybe even hit 7 rebel. Right now he's at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rebels. But he thinks that he's strong enough and he stopped rolling at 28 seconds so that he could get the itemization right. Because this is a very difficult turn. And how would you itemize this? So he just hits an Alawi 2. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 possible items that you can make with the open component. So going back to what we discussed previously, what's your strongest unit? Right now your carry is your Jinx and your main tank is your Alawi 2. So we want to make 3 full tank items because we have 7 Rebel, which we need time for Jinx to be able to cast her big boom, and we have a Rage Blade on Zoe. So you want to make 3 full tank items, and ideally 1 Zoe item, which means that we got to use the gloves and the bow somehow to make a Zoe item. And the tricky part is this bow here is kind of hard to make into something other than Static Shiv or Nasher. And Alawi really benefits from a tier item, so you want to put some kind of tier item on Alawi since Zoe is kind of secondary right now. And so the way he gets about that is he's missing Shred for the Jinx. So the first thing he builds is Even Shroud here. And then you want a tier item, which means either Redemption or Vow. But if we build a Vow, then you can't build then you would have to build Warmog as the third item for Alawi, and then you can't build a second item for Zoe, which means that if you build Even Shroud first, then working backwards, you need to use Tier for Redemption, and then Vest for a Steadfast, and then you can use the Belt for Guardbreaker or Nasher, and Guardbreaker will be stronger with Open Bow because you don't have anti-heal. So that would be the solution that Dishsoap got to, was Even Shroud, Redemption, Steadfast, and then Guardbreaker for Zoe with Open Bow. So these types of puzzles are really useful, especially with Salvage Bin, in terms of thinking about like how you want to approach your itemization. All right, game 3 was Warwick Encounter. A key idea here is that you want to be strong in the early game, and 2-star units are stronger, especially when you have fewer item components, because you won't be outscaled by, like, let's say a 2-star 1 cost that has 2 or 3 items. And so normally you would not pick 2-trick, but on this, given that he doesn't have much direction here, like only one pair, he would normally pick Wandering Trainer, but on Warwick Encounter and on 2-component, he's willing to take 2-trick to try to be able to streak more. Iron Bog also took 2-trick on another game where Mort Dog actually kind of called that out as what he thought was a bad play, but it was a 2-item component opener, and so most people aren't even gonna be able to slam an item. Like half the lobby probably don't have slammable items, so your 2-star 2-cost can just usually carry you pretty hard. Do we level here to preserve streak? So we're on 4 streak. We have a bunch of pairs. We have set pair, TF pair, and Rennie pair. We could slam JG, Archangel. So right now we're kind of straddling 2 lines. We could go towards a quick striker reroll. We could play Visionaries. And we are streaking. So part of the question is, do we level here to preserve streak? And so Dishsoap says yes. Next question is, after we level, what unit do we put in, right? We would probably put in the Morgana for 4 Visionary. Next, the question is, do we roll? So after leveling, we're at 49 gold. And the answer is yes, we do roll because we have 3 pairs. We're on streak. Our rule efficiency is very good. And a Rel would be superior to the Morgana because it would give us Sentinel. So we have a lot of outs. When do we stop? He stops at 40 gold. So again, this is a very common pattern, is when he has high roll efficiency or high upside, Dishsoap will roll and he'll usually stop around 40 gold. So here he's at 37, but he can sell to make 40. So you only lose 1 gold of interest, but you give yourself a lot of upside potential. And so again, that's a very common pattern, is give yourself opportunity to high roll when, by rolling down a bit, when playing reroll, streaking, or have a lot of pairs. All right, next is, do we roll here to preserve streak? So we have a 5 streak. We have 2 duplicators and 5 Rennies, 6. Wow, what is her name? Why am I blinking? Oh. Yeah, we have 6 of these units. So if we hit in 35 gold, part of the question is, can we hit some Rennies? If we hit, well, we have 5 copies of Rennie. If we hit 2 Rennies, then we could duplicate for a 3-star Rennie. And in this case, he does a slight roll down to 30. And if he hit 1 Rennie, he likely would have sent it. So again, the same idea applies. He kind of straddles this middle ground where if he has the potential to high roll, he will give himself the opportunity to roll a little bit to get that high roll. If he got 1 more Rennie, he would have probably just sent it because he has 2 duplicators. But if he doesn't, then he's willing to stop and kind of play the longer game. All right, here, the question is, what item component do we want to pick? We do have one Chemtech item, but I believe this is like a tier 1 or maybe a tier 2. So part of the question is, do we want a traditional tank item in the vest and an inferior Rage Blade? Or we can do red buff since we're missing anti-heal and JG and be satisfied with this tank item on the Rennie. So he picks the bow to ensure he gets red buff, and he can always get more tank item at the carousel. All right, so that was game 3. Next, game 4. How do your items impact augment selection? So So here we have a Rebel opener. As far as items go, if we were to slam a carry item, it would be either Runons or Rageblade. And these were his augments possibilities. And I would have thought Patient Study would just give him more fast 8 options. But given that he could slam Rageblade and Even Shroud or Sunfire, which is stronger early game, he leans towards taking the Bruiser. And because it gives him a set, he can actually play 3 Rebel, 2 Bruiser, which actually gives him a reasonably strong opener so that he can angle towards Bruiser Twitch. So again, playing around your item components to think about what direction you're going in at augment selection. Next, how does playing a B tier comp, since Twitch is kind of a B tier comp, how does that impact your augment selection? So in this case, he does high roll an early Twitch, and if he were to take Coronation, it would likely be stronger right now because he would get a fully itemized Ezreal 2, and I believe he has on a 4 streak right now. But Bulky Buddies benefits a lot from 6 Bruiser. So this has a higher cap. This is stronger now. And he ends up rolling middle, Buried Treasures, not much better. He ends up rolling right because he values combat over the 3 item carry. Because with a B tier comp, even if you hit all your units, if you don't have good augments and items, then you could still bot 4. And here, same idea. He gets 1 buff, 2 buff, which red buff is what he... Or actually, he doesn't need red buff since he already has Sunfire. But I suspect the same idea would apply, is even if he didn't have Sunfire, this could be pretty good. Because blue buff will be good on Caitlyn later. And you could have like a GP hold it. And red buff would be good on Twitch. And the duplicator would be extremely valuable to hit an early Twitch too. But he's really going for higher cap, especially since he's healthy. And with a B tier comp, you really need to have like S tier augments for it. So he picks Bulky Buddies here. Next here, do we level and roll on 4-1 to preserve streak? This is Caitlyn encounter. He just got a big gold infusion. It would cost him a little less than 50 gold to level, so he'd be at like low 40s. And he could roll. He has Twitch pair with Bulky Buddies. It would benefit a lot from getting to 8 units. He's close to hitting, but he's on a 3 streak. I would have leaned towards yes, but he decided not to. And part of the reason I suspect is because nobody else was contesting Twitch and Mundo. There were some players, because it's Caitlyn encounter, that were leveling, I believe, 1 or 2 at least, leveling and rolling now, which means they would thin out the forecast pool, making it more cost efficient for him to roll on the next turn. And because there are multiple people hitting a bunch of units rolling, we're kind of far away. Even if we hit Twitch 2, we're far away from hitting a 2-star forecast, which means it's not guaranteed that we would be able to preserve streak here, even if we hit the Twitch 2. And so he decides not to roll there for those combinations of reasons. So again, how does playing a B tier comp affect augment selection? This is his board here, and I would have picked rolling for days here just to be able to like hit, Twitch 2 right away and go fast 9. But because we're actually playing 6 Bruiser with Bulky, Corrosion is actually really strong because you're playing a scaling fight with lots of HP in the front. And again, this goes back to when you're playing a B tier comp, you really want to maximize your combat augments. Also, one other thing I want to keep in mind is that he was in check. So if Dishsoap wins this game, he would have won the tournament. And so rolling for days, I would say, gives you maybe lowers your variance, but decreases your win rate. Whereas Corrosion increases your upside, because if you can just get lucky and hit your units early and have the combat augment, you really maximize your upside to win the fight. So he ends up picking Corrosion as a result of that analysis. All right, next, what items do we make here? If any. I would have thought we would make adaptive slam here. We're on 4 streak. We hit Twitch 2, and we want to preserve streak and leave glove open for Last Whisper. But he decides nothing. I want Even Shroud. And given that he's last pick, a bow would have been probably harder to pick up than belt. And keeping both glove and cloak open gives him more option to get either Last Whisper or Even Shroud off of Carousel. And open tier is better for Caitlyn later to get her first cast off. So he really wants to make sure he can get some form of shred, and so does not slam adaptive as a result of that. All right, and then he gets a belt off of Carousel, which he was talking about building Even Shroud. So what does he build here? Do we build Even Shroud? No, he actually builds Redemption. And the reason is he builds Redemption. He still has the 2 shred components open for neutrals, and Redemption is just super strong for 6 bruiser. And so again, he's playing a mid-tier comp, but trying to play for cap out first, right? So he's trying to build the Redemption, which is a better item in the long run, with the bulky buddy 6 bruiser and leaving the shred options open. All right, last game. He's playing for first again. He's checked with 2 other players. No encounter. And how do these item components affect your augment selection? So he would roll middle, or how does playing for first affect your augment selection? Normally I would have picked Slammin', but he says it probably has to be tower defense and play for some +2 shenanigans. He doesn't have clear direction right now, and with Slammin', he would need to slam his items, and that would be kind of hard to streak with because it's unclear, like, what would you slam? Like Hodge, open belt, like maybe Morello on the Darius. And so tower defense gives him clear direction, whereas maybe Slammin' would have been more pickable if he had 3 components or 2 components, but with 5 components, you really need to commit those items, and he wants direction, which makes his game a lot easier to play. So he rolled the right 2. Worth the wait would be solid top 4. Pyro would be good for Twitch. But again, those are like maybe good top 4 plays, not great playing for first place. So he goes with tower defense to give him the highest win potential. And then he hits a Firelight Emblem, which item-wise it's not bad, but he says it's not great. But God, how does Zeri ever win? So here, again, there's this question, how deep do you roll for Zeri 3? He is on a 2 loss, which decreases the incentive to roll, but he only needs 2 more Zeris to hit. He is holding a Silco because Lucas is playing Dominators. And he rolls a little bit and stops at 40 again. So again, there's this idea of if he hit 1 Zeri, he probably would have sent it. But he didn't hit any, so he said, I can't go all in here. Likely also because next round is anomaly round, so he does want to preserve some gold to be able to make sure he gets a good anomaly on Zeri. And finally, and by the way, he ends up sending it next round after anomaly, which further kind of makes sense that he was kind of waiting on the anomaly. And lastly here, this is his itemization. You would think that this is like pretty optimal itemization, right? This is his opponent. And he actually says, because the Tristana has fish bones and there's a Warwick here, the primary way he loses this fight is if the Tristana randomly fish bones his Zeri and the Warwick finishes his Zeri off. So what he ends up doing is moving the Edge of Night over to the Zeri and the Last Whisper over to the Twitch, which is insane. And Dishsoap ends up winning the tournament as a result. I don't think it was that close, but given that he was probably favored to win this fight, the only way he loses it is if that one scenario occurs, and he had the foresight to critically think about what are the possible ways that he loses the fight to come up with this solution to Edge of Night the Zeri, which is just genius mode. All right, so that covers all of my learnings from Dishsoap's 5 games. The big idea that I want to really take away for myself is giving yourself the opportunity to high roll when you're playing for streak, when you're close to hitting a 3-star or you have a lot of pairs. You roll down a little bit to 40 gold. If you get even closer, then you can send it. If not, then you can pause and kind of regroup in a later round. I hope you found this analysis helpful. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you're able to consider the meta mindset of the day as we're going into set 14. I will start to put out some set 14 content soon as I dive into that and PPE goes live on Tuesday. And thanks for watching. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this whole video, and I'll see you in the next one.